Josephine, darling, I opened the Bordeaux you love. Let me pour you a glass.
Louis Ashford's voice carries the particular warmth he reserves for public moments, the kind that photographs well and quotes better. Josephine, darling, I opened the Bordeaux you love. Let me pour you a glass. His hand is already on the bottle. The kitchen is empty except for him. The staff has been dismissed for the evening, a detail he planned 3 days ago. He pours the wine with the steady hands of a man who has never doubted his own decisions, who has built an empire by identifying what he wants and engineering the path to take it. He reaches into his jacket pocket. The small vial is pharmaceutical grade, ordered through a private supplier whose client list includes men who understand that power is about control and control is about leverage. The liquid is colorless, tasteless. It will dissolve completely in the wine, undetectable to anyone who isn't looking for it, and Josephine has never had reason to look for anything in a drink her husband hands her. Louis adds precisely the amount he was told would create the desired effect, not incapacitation, just enough to lower inhibitions, heighten physical responsiveness, create the appearance of willing participation in what comes next. He swirls the glass gently, watching the wine catch the light from the pendant fixtures overhead. Everything in this penthouse catches light beautifully. He designed it that way. In the living room, Josephine Ashford is greeting their dinner guests with the practiced grace of a woman who has spent 6 years learning to perform the role of billionaire's wife. She smiles at Patricia and her husband, thanks them for coming, asks about their recent trip to the coast. Her dress is elegant without being ostentatious, her jewelry understated, her entire presentation calibrated to suggest substance rather than display. She has learned that Louis prefers her this way, visible enough to reflect well on him, but never so visible that she draws focus from his own presence. It is a narrow target to hit, and she has become precise in her aim. But tonight, something feels different. Josephine cannot name it yet, cannot point to a specific detail that breaks pattern. Louis has been unusually attentive for the past week. More gifts, more compliments, more public demonstrations of affection that feel like theater rather than intimacy. She knows this language now. She has learned to read the subtext of his attention, and increased warmth without increased genuine interest usually means he wants something. She does not know what yet, but she is paying attention. Louis emerges from the kitchen carrying 2 wine glasses. He hands one to Josephine with a smile that their guests will later describe as devoted. "For my beautiful wife," he says. Josephine takes the glass. She notices the specific bottle. It is a vintage she mentioned loving during their engagement, a detail she is surprised Louis remembered. For a moment, something in her wants to believe this is genuine, that perhaps the distance she has felt for months is in her imagination, that maybe tonight is actually about connection rather than strategy. But she has learned not to trust the moments when Louis appears most affectionate. Those are usually the moments when he is most calculating. She does not drink yet. Social training dictates waiting until all guests have their drinks, until a toast is offered, until the ritual of gathering is complete. But she holds the glass, and Louis watches her hold it, and there is something in his watching that makes her aware of her own visibility. The other guests arrive in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Marcus and Rebecca, a couple Louis does business with. Jonathan, a venture capitalist who has been circling one of Louis's projects for months. And Trevor Gaines, a business associate Josephine has met exactly twice before, both times in contexts where Louis made a point of mentioning how much Trevor would enjoy getting to know her better. Trevor is handsome in the way that men with inherited wealth and good trainers tend to be. He is charming in the way that men who have never been denied anything tend to be. And he looks at Josephine with an interest that is not subtle, not respectful, and not discouraged by Louis's presence. In fact, Louis seems to encourage it. He positions Trevor next to Josephine as they move toward the dining room. He creates conversational openings that require Trevor to engage her directly. He finds reasons to step away, leaving them in proximity that would be inappropriate if it were not happening in Louis's own home, with Louis's apparent blessing. Josephine understands social dynamics. She spent years building relationships in nonprofit spaces where reading subtext and managing complex interpersonal politics was essential to getting anything done. She knows when someone is being positioned. She knows when a situation is being staged. She does not yet know why, but she knows it is happening. Louis raises his glass as they settle in the living room before dinner. "To good friends, good wine, and good fortune," he says. The guests echo the toast. Josephine lifts her glass to her lips. The wine is excellent, rich and complex with the kind of depth that comes from grapes grown in soil that has been cultivated for generations. She takes a second sip, then a third. Louis watches. Not obviously. Not in a way that would draw attention. But Josephine has learned to recognize when her husband is tracking her, and he is tracking her now with the focus of a man waiting for a specific outcome. The conversation flows around her. Business talk, mostly. Marcus describing a deal structure. Jonathan debating market timing. Rebecca offering polite commentary that suggests she has heard all of this before and learned to appear engaged without actually listening. Josephine contributes occasionally, but she is quieter than usual. Not because Louis has silenced her. He has never needed to be that overt. He simply created an environment where her voice carried less weight than others, where her opinions were met with the kind of patient tolerance that communicated they were charming but not serious, appreciated but not influential. So she learned to speak less, to observe more, to pay attention to what people revealed when they thought she was decorative rather than diagnostic. And tonight, Louis is revealing something. She still does not know what. But the architecture of this evening is too deliberate to be accidental. The guest list is too curated. Trevor's presence is too pointed. 20 minutes after her first sip of wine, Josephine notices the warmth. It begins in her chest, a spreading heat that is not unpleasant but is unusual. Her skin feels more sensitive. The fabric of her dress against her shoulders suddenly registers with heightened awareness. Sounds seem sharper. The light seems brighter. This is not what wine does. Josephine knows her own body, knows her own responses to alcohol. This is something else. Her mind achieves clarity, even as her physical sensations intensify. Someone puts something in her drink. The logic is immediate and certain. The only person who had private access to her glass was Louis. Louis drugged her. The realization does not land with shock. It lands with a terrible confirming weight. Of course, this is the boundary he was willing to cross. She has watched him cross smaller boundaries for years, each violation a test of how much she would tolerate. She stayed quiet when he restructured the foundation to exclude her input. She stayed quiet when he dismissed her ideas in front of his colleagues. She stayed quiet when he began framing her compassion as naivety that he had matured her beyond. Her silence taught him she would tolerate anything. So he escalated to this. Josephine does not let her realization show on her face. She has learned to control her expressions, to maintain composure even when something inside her is fracturing. She takes another sip of wine, a choice that might seem foolish except that she needs Louis to believe his plan is working. She needs him to continue feeling confident, because confident people make mistakes, and she needs him to make every mistake he is capable of making tonight. Her evening clutch is on the side table near her chair. Inside it, smaller than a car key fob, is the emergency button Marcus gave her 3 months ago. She has carried it to every social event since, a talisman she never expected to use. Marcus works in private security. He knows what powerful men are capable of when they decide someone is an obstacle rather than an asset. When Josephine mentioned, casually over coffee, that Louis' social circle included men with complicated reputations regarding their wives, Marcus went still. He did not ask her if she was safe. He did not press for details. He simply handed her a device and told her that if she ever felt unsafe, pressing the button would send her exact location and an automated alert to him, to her attorney friend Sophia, and to Patricia, her former nonprofit board chair who survived her own escape from a controlling marriage. You probably won't need it, Marcus had said. But if you do, help comes immediately. No questions, no judgment, just extraction. Josephine had thanked him while privately believing Louis was manipulative, not dangerous. Controlling, not violent. She does not believe that anymore. The dinner progresses. Josephine feels her physical control slipping incrementally. Her body is responding to whatever Louis put in her drink, but her mind remains sharp, observant, cataloging every detail. She notices that Louis creates multiple opportunities for her to be alone with Trevor. He suggests they move to the balcony for air. He asks Trevor to show Josephine something on his phone, a photo from a recent trip, an excuse for proximity. Trevor, to his credit, seems uncertain. He responds to Louis' cues, but his body language suggests confusion rather than predatory intent. He is being positioned as much as Josephine is, though he does not yet understand toward what end. Rebecca and Marcus leave first, citing an early morning obligation. Jonathan follows shortly after, pleading a conference call with international partners. The departures feel scripted, as though Louis communicated timing in advance. Now it is just Louis, Josephine, and Trevor in the expansive living room that suddenly feels much smaller. Louis refreshes drinks. He brings Josephine another glass of the same wine, and she accepts it because refusing would signal awareness, and she cannot afford to signal awareness yet. She needs Louis to reveal the full scope of his plan. She needs him to cross every line so completely that there is no ambiguity, no room for him to reframe or minimize later. She takes small sips and lets most of the wine remain in the glass. "Josephine, you look flushed," Louis says, his voice carrying performative concern. "Are you feeling all right?" The question is for Trevor's benefit, establishing a narrative. She is not feeling well. She is acting unlike herself. Whatever happens next can be attributed to her compromised state rather than deliberate engineering. "I'm fine," Josephine says. Her voice is steady despite the heat in her blood, despite the way every nerve ending seems to be firing with heightened intensity. "Just warm. Why don't you lie down for a bit?" Louis suggests. "Trevor, would you mind helping Josephine to the guest suite? I need to take a call from Singapore. Terrible timing, but you know how international deals are." There it is, the setup made explicit. Louis is creating a scenario where Josephine, visibly impaired, is alone with Trevor in a bedroom. The penthouse has security cameras. Louis, as head of security, Dominic, was hired 5 weeks ago specifically because his previous employer praised his discretion and his willingness to document sensitive situations without asking questions. Louis is engineering evidence of infidelity, evidence that will allow him to invoke the prenuptial agreement's adultery clause, which heavily penalizes the unfaithful spouse. Evidence that will let him divorce Josephine while framing her as the betrayer, allowing him to exit the marriage with his reputation enhanced and his financial position protected. It is comprehensive, it is sophisticated, and it would work if Josephine were the woman Louis believes her to be, naive, powerless, and unaware that her husband views her as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. But Josephine is not that woman. She has not been that woman for 2 years, not since she started recognizing the patterns of conditional affection, not since she began documenting rather than dismissing, not since she understood that Louis' love was a reward system and she was being trained rather than cherished. "I'd rather stay here," Josephine says. She moves to one of the upholstered chairs near the window, choosing a seat that is well lit, visible, and solitary, rather than the couch where Trevor could sit beside her. Louis' expression flickers. Just for a second, something crosses his face that is not the devoted husband concerned for his wife's comfort. It is frustration, calculation, the look of a man whose carefully constructed plan is encountering unexpected resistance. "Darling, you'll be more comfortable lying down," he insists. "I'm comfortable here," Josephine replies. She watches Louis recalibrate. He cannot force her toward the bedroom without revealing the coercion inherent in his suggestion. Trevor is watching this exchange with increasing discomfort, a man who is beginning to suspect he has been invited into something he did not agree to participate in. "Trevor, maybe I should go," Trevor says. "If Josephine isn't feeling well, you two probably need privacy." "Nonsense," Louis says, too quickly. "Stay, have another drink. Josephine's just had too much wine. She'll be fine in a moment." But Josephine has not had too much wine. She has had too much of whatever Louis put in the wine, and she is fighting its effects with every measure of focus she possesses. Her body feels like it belongs to someone else, responses heightened and control diminished. But her mind is clear, perfectly, coldly clear. She reaches for her clutch on the side table. The movement is casual, a woman retrieving her phone to check the time. Her fingers find the small device inside. Not yet. She does not press it yet. She needs Louis to reveal more. She needs him to speak his intentions plainly enough that there is no possible reframing later. Trevor stands. "I really think I should leave. Thank you for dinner, Louis. Josephine, I hope you feel better." Louis moves to intercept him, a hand on Trevor's shoulder, voice low but not low enough that Josephine cannot hear. "I told you she'd be receptive tonight. Just give it a few more minutes. She's interested. She's just shy about it with me in the room." The words are quiet but devastating. Louis is telling Trevor that Josephine's resistance is performance, that her discomfort is shyness, that her impairment is consent. Trevor pulls away from Louis's hand. "I don't think she looks interested. I think she looks unwell, and I'm leaving." He does. He walks to the elevator, presses the call button, and does not look back. The doors open. He steps inside. And then it is just Josephine and Louis in the vast penthouse that suddenly feels like a trap rather than a home. Louis watches the elevator doors close. Then he turns to Josephine, and the mask drops completely. "You couldn't just cooperate, could you?" he says. His voice has lost its warmth, its public polish. This is the Louis that Josephine has glimpsed in unguarded moments over the past 2 years, the man beneath the performance of devoted husband. This is the Louis who views obstacles with cold assessment and removes them with efficient cruelty. "What did you put in my drink?" Josephine asks. Her voice is steady, but her hands are shaking. She presses them together to still the tremor. Louis laughs. It is not a pleasant sound. "Something to help you relax, to make you more receptive. You've been so tense lately, Josephine, so resistant to perfectly reasonable suggestions. I thought a little chemical encouragement might help you remember how to be agreeable." "You drugged me," Josephine says, stating it plainly, establishing the fact in words that cannot be misinterpreted. "I helped you," Louis corrects. "You were always so anxious about intimacy, so concerned about propriety. I gave you permission to let go. If you'd just gone along with Trevor, this would have been so much simpler." "Simpler for what?" Josephine asks, though she already knows. Louis walks to the bar cart, pours himself whiskey, drinks it in one swallow. "Simpler for ending this marriage without you taking half of everything I've built. The prenup is very clear about infidelity. If you cheat, you leave with almost nothing, and after tonight there would have been ample evidence that you cheated." "Evidence you manufactured," Josephine says. "Evidence nonetheless," Louis replies. "Witnesses saw you flirting with Trevor. Security footage will show you drinking heavily, behaving inappropriately. Trevor will confirm that you invited his attention. By the time my attorneys finish constructing the narrative, you'll be the unfaithful wife who threw away a good marriage for a moment of selfish indulgence." He says this calmly, as though he is describing a business strategy rather than the destruction of another human being. And perhaps to Louis, there is no difference. Josephine is a business problem. He acquired her when she served his image. Now she has outlived her usefulness, and he is liquidating the asset. "Why not just divorce me?" Josephine asks. "If you want out, leave." Louis smiles. It does not reach his eyes. "Because you're expensive, Josephine. That prenup you signed gives you a very generous settlement in the event of divorce without cause, 60% of marital assets, control of the foundation, ongoing support. My father's attorney insisted on those terms, said it would demonstrate good faith, protect the family reputation. But there's an exception. If either party commits adultery or abuse, the offending party forfeits those protections." "So you decided to make me the offending party," Josephine says. "I decided to create a situation where the outcome was inevitable," Louis says. "You would have slept with Trevor tonight, not because you wanted to, but because the drug in your system would have made it very difficult to resist. You would have been photographed in a compromising position. Witnesses would testify to your behavior. And I would have been the wronged husband, generous enough to offer you a small settlement, out of respect for what we once had, but certainly not the fortune you'd get otherwise." Every word is a confession. Every sentence is evidence. And Josephine's phone, still in her clutch, is recording everything. The emergency alert system Marcus installed includes automatic audio recording when activated. She pressed the button 40 seconds ago, the moment Louis dismissed Trevor and the mask began to slip. The button has a 15-second delay to prevent accidental activation. Then, it sends her precise location and an automated alert to her emergency contacts. By now, Marcus knows she is in distress. Sophia knows. Patricia knows. Help is already being dispatched. But Louis does not know any of this. He believes Josephine is trapped, powerless, defeated. He believes she has no resources independent of him, no support system he has not already accounted for, no capacity to resist or document or protect herself. He is wrong. He has been wrong about her for 6 years. But he is especially catastrophically wrong tonight. "You won't get away with this," Josephine says. Louis laughs again. "Who's going to stop me? You? With what resources, Josephine? Your nonprofit salary from 6 years ago? The friends you haven't seen since you married me? Because you were always too busy with foundation work? The family you barely speak to because we've been so consumed with building our life together?" Each phrase is a small cruelty, designed to reinforce her isolation. Except Louis does not know that Josephine never stopped speaking to her family. She had coffee with Marcus every month. She met Sophia for lunch every 6 weeks. She stayed in contact with Patricia, sought her advice, learned from her experience navigating a similar marriage to a similar man. Louis does not know because Josephine did not tell him. She learned early in their marriage that Louis monitored her relationships, assessed their value to him, and created friction with anyone who might offer her perspective or support independent of his influence. So she stopped mentioning those relationships. She let Louis believe she was isolated. Information asymmetry. Louis taught her about it through his business calls, his strategy sessions, his explanations of how deals get done. He never imagined she would apply those lessons to their marriage. The foundation money you've been stealing won't help you either, Josephine says quietly. Louis goes very still. What did you say? The $4.2 million you redirected from the foundation to your real estate projects. The grants I approved for educational programs that somehow ended up funding your commercial developments. I have copies of every proposal, every budget, every approval document. I tracked where the money actually went. Louis's face changes. The confident amusement drains away, replaced by something colder. You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention, Josephine corrects. You taught me that information is leverage. You just didn't expect me to be intelligent enough to gather any. Those records are meaningless, Louis says, but his voice has lost its certainty. I control the foundation board. I control the approval processes. Anything you copied is out of context. Context like the emails where you instructed your CFO to make the redirections. Context like the board meeting minutes where concerns were raised and overruled. I have all of it, Louis. I've had it for 18 months. She watches him recalculate. Watches him realize that the quiet wife he dismissed as decorative has been documenting his corruption with the same precision he used to engineer her entrapment. It doesn't matter, Louis says finally. You'll never use it, because if you try to expose me, I'll destroy you. I have the resources to bury you in legal action for years. I have the social connections to ensure you're excluded from every circle that matters. I have the narrative control to make you a cautionary tale about ungrateful women who bite the hand that feeds them. Maybe, Josephine says. Or maybe I have something you don't know about. Louis stares at her. For the first time tonight, he looks uncertain. You're bluffing. Josephine does not answer. She simply sits in the well-lit chair by the window, hands folded in her lap, and waits. Louis's phone buzzes. He glances at it, frowns, answers. What? Josephine cannot hear the other side of the conversation, but she watches Louis's expression change from irritation to confusion to something approaching alarm. What do you mean someone's at the door? Louis says, We're not expecting anyone. No, don't let them up. I don't care what they're saying, this is private property. He listens. His jaw tightens. On whose authority? No, you can't just let them access the penthouse. I'm calling building security. He ends the call. Looks at Josephine. What did you do? The elevator chimes. The doors open. And Marcus steps out, followed by two men in suits that mark them as private security professionals, and a woman Josephine recognizes as one of Sophia's law partners. Marcus's gaze finds Josephine immediately, scanning her for visible injury, assessing her condition with the trained eye of someone whose job is protecting people from exactly this kind of situation. Josephine, are you hurt? I'm drugged, Josephine says. Her voice is calm, factual. Louis put something in my wine. I don't know what. I need a medical evaluation and a toxicology screen. The attorney is already on her phone, calling for a doctor. The security team positions themselves between Josephine and Louis, not aggressively, but with clear intention. No one is touching anyone, but the power in the room has shifted so completely that Louis actually takes a step backward. You can't just break into my home, Louis says. His voice has the sharp edge of a man whose control is slipping and who does not know how to function without it. We didn't break in, Marcus says. Josephine granted me emergency access authorization 3 months ago. Notarized documentation filed with building management. When she activated her emergency alert, we were legally entitled to enter and ensure her safety. Emergency alert, Louis repeats. He looks at Josephine. You've been planning this. I've been preparing, Josephine says. There's a difference. Sophia arrives next, moving past Louis without acknowledging him, crouching beside Josephine's chair. How are you feeling? Do you need to sit down? I'm already sitting, Josephine says. And I'm feeling like my husband drugged me and tried to engineer evidence of infidelity so he could divorce me without honoring the prenuptial agreement. Sophia's expression hardens. She is a corporate attorney who occasionally takes family law cases for friends. She does not take them to be gentle. She takes them to win. Did he admit that? Sophia asks. Yes, Josephine says. And my phone recorded it. She reaches into her clutch, retrieves her phone, and hands it to Sophia. The recording is clear, time-stamped, unambiguous. Louis' voice explaining the drug, the setup with Trevor, the plan to use manufactured evidence of adultery to void the prenuptial protections. Sophia listens to 30 seconds and stops the playback. This is more than enough. Josephine, we need to get you medical attention immediately. Evidence preservation is crucial for the criminal case. Criminal case? Louis' voice rises. There's no criminal case. This is a private matter between my wife and me. Drugging someone without their consent is assault, Sophia says, her voice perfectly level. Doing so with the intent to engineer a sexual encounter for purposes of blackmail and fraud elevates it further. This isn't a private matter, Mr. Ashford. This is a crime. The doctor arrives, a woman in her 50s who moves with brisk competence. She assesses Josephine's pupil dilation, takes her pulse, asks about symptoms. Josephine describes the heat, the heightened sensitivity, the disconnect between physical response and conscious intent. Consistent with aphrodisiac compounds, the doctor says. We need to get you to a facility for a full workup and evidence collection. You'll need a blood draw within the next few hours for the toxicology screen to be admissible. She's not going anywhere, Louis says. Josephine, tell them you're fine. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Josephine looks at her husband, the man she married 6 years ago, believing he loved her. The man who told her she was different, genuine, that her compassion reminded him there were things money could not buy. The man who slowly, expertly isolated her from her sense of self and then tried to destroy her when she became inconvenient. This is not a misunderstanding, Josephine says. This is exactly what it looks like. Marcus moves closer to Louis, not threatening, simply occupying space in a way that communicates Louis is no longer the one with physical authority in this room. Mr. Ashford, I recommend you contact your attorney. My sister will be pressing charges and there will be both criminal and civil proceedings. Anything you say right now can and will be used against you. Your sister, Louis says, looking between Marcus and Josephine. You've been coordinating with her family behind my back. Marcus is my brother, Josephine says. I never stopped talking to him. You assumed I did because I stopped mentioning him. You assumed my silence meant absence. It meant strategy. She stands, and the room tilts slightly, the drug still affecting her balance, but Marcus is there immediately, steadying her without making her feel weak. This is what support looks like. Not control disguised as care, but actual care offered without conditions. We're taking you to the hospital, Sophia says. Patricia is meeting us there. We'll have a complete medical team, evidence preservation, and legal documentation. By tomorrow morning, we'll have filed for emergency protective orders and initiated formal proceedings. You can't do this, Louis says. But his voice has lost its conviction. He is watching his carefully constructed plan disintegrate in real time, and he does not have a contingency because he never believed Josephine was capable of outmaneuvering him. We already are, Josephine says. The security team escorts her to the elevator. Marcus stays close, a protective presence that has nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with genuine concern. Sophia is on her phone, already coordinating with prosecutors, filing motions, activating the legal machinery that will transform this from a private violation into a public reckoning. As the elevator doors begin to close, Josephine looks back at Louis one last time. He is standing in the middle of his pristine penthouse, surrounded by the wealth and status he has spent his life accumulating, and he looks completely lost. Power, Josephine understands now, is not about who has the most money or the highest status or the most obvious authority. Power is about who has the clearest understanding of reality and the best preparation for the moment when reality can no longer be denied. Louis had wealth. Louis had status. Louis had institutional authority. But Josephine had the truth. She had documentation. She had a network of people who valued her for who she actually was rather than what she provided for their image. And she had been patient enough to let Louis reveal himself completely before activating the power she had been quietly building for months. The elevator descends. Josephine's hands are still shaking, but they are steady enough to hold the phone that recorded her husband's confession. Her body still feels the effects of the drug he gave her without consent, but her mind is perfectly clear. She was never the woman Louis believed her to be. Compliant, powerless, easy to control and easier to discard. She was the woman who learned his patterns, documented his cruelty, prepared for the worst, and when the worst came, she was ready. The lobby is bright and busy, people moving through their evening unaware that 3 floors above them, a man is realizing that he has catastrophically underestimated his wife. The doorman sees Josephine supported by Marcus and the security team and moves to help, but Marcus waves him off with quiet authority. Outside, a private medical transport is waiting. Not an ambulance with sirens and spectacle, but a discreet vehicle that will take Josephine to a private facility where her examination will be thorough, documented, and protected from the kind of interference Louis's money might buy at a public hospital. Sophia opens the door. Patricia's already there. She brought a crisis counselor and a patient advocate. You won't be alone for any part of this. Josephine nods. She is not alone. She has not been alone, even in the moments when Louis's isolation tactics made her feel most disconnected. She maintained relationships. She asked for help before she desperately needed it. She built support systems that did not depend on her husband's approval or awareness. All of that was preparation. All of it was patience that looked like passivity, but was actually power gathering itself for the moment when it would be required. That moment is now. Marcus helps her into the vehicle. The door closes. Through the tinted window, Josephine can see the building where she has lived for 6 years. The penthouse where Louis is probably calling his attorneys, activating his own network, preparing his own narrative. But he is already too late. The evidence is documented. The witnesses are credible. The recording is clear. And the story is no longer his to tell. The vehicle pulls away from the curb, and Josephine leans her head back against the seat, closes her eyes, and lets herself feel the weight of what just happened. Her husband drugged her. He tried to engineer her destruction. He admitted it while believing she was powerless to stop him. He was wrong, and his wrongness is about to cost him everything he thought he controlled. Josephine opens her eyes, looks at Marcus, who is watching her with the fierce protectiveness of a brother who would have intervened months ago if she had asked, but who respected her enough to let her determine her own timing. "Thank you," she says, "for coming so fast." "I was ready the moment you took the button," Marcus replies. "I've been ready since the day I gave it to you." "Did you think I'd need it?" Marcus is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "I thought powerful men sometimes test boundaries, and I wanted you to have options when that happened." Options, not rescue, not intervention that requires her to be a victim waiting for salvation. Options, agency, the ability to activate support on her terms at her chosen moment when she decided the boundary had been crossed too far. That is what tonight was. Not helplessness, choice. Josephine chose when to press the button. She chose to let Louis speak his confession plainly. She chose to document rather than confront. She chose to activate her network at the precise moment when it would be most effective. And now she is choosing to see this through, to let the legal system work, to let the evidence speak, to let the truth be established in ways that cannot be reframed or minimized or dismissed as a misunderstanding between spouses. The facility comes into view, a modern building that looks more like an upscale medical office than a hospital. Patricia is waiting outside, and when she sees the vehicle, her expression shifts from worry to relief. The door opens. Patricia reaches in, takes Josephine's hand. "You're safe now," she says. And Josephine, despite everything, despite the drug in her system and the betrayal that will take months or years to fully process, believes her. Because tonight she learned something essential. Louis had power over her only as long as she granted it. The moment she withdrew her cooperation, the moment she activated her own resources, the moment she stopped performing the role of compliant wife and started operating as a woman with agency and intelligence and preparation, the entire structure of his control collapsed. He needed her to be powerless. She refused. And that refusal, quiet and strategic and timed with precision, was the most devastating thing she could have done. Inside the facility, the medical team is ready. They explain every step of the examination, every evidence collection protocol, every documentation procedure. They ask permission before each action. They treat Josephine not as a victim to be processed, but as a person with autonomy who is choosing to cooperate with their assessment. The toxicology screen will take several hours to process. The examination is thorough, professional, and respectful. The doctor who conducts it has done this thousands of times, and she explains everything in language that is clear without being condescending. "The compounds in your system are consistent with pharmaceutical-grade aphrodisiacs," she confirms. "Not recreational drugs. These are substances that have to be specially ordered. There will be a paper trail. A paper trail, more evidence, more documentation of Louis's premeditation, his planning, his understanding that what he was doing required procurement and preparation. Sophia is already working that angle. already requesting records from specialty pharmaceutical suppliers, already building the case that this was not an impulsive mistake, but a calculated assault. In a private consultation room, after the examination is complete and the evidence has been collected, Josephine sits with Patricia and Marcus and Sophia and lets herself feel the exhaustion. "What happens now?" she asks. Sophia opens her tablet, showing a timeline she has already constructed. "Tonight, we file for emergency protective orders. Tomorrow morning, we meet with prosecutors and provide the evidence. We'll file civil suit invoking the prenuptial abuse clause. We'll request a full forensic audit of the foundation's finances, and we'll ensure that every media outlet receives the factual sequence of events before Louis's PR team can construct an alternative narrative." "He'll fight," Josephine says. "He'll lose," Sophia replies. "The evidence is too clear, the recording is too damning, and honestly, Josephine, you've done most of the work already. The documentation you've been keeping for 18 months, the foundation records, the emergency preparation. You built the case before you even knew you'd need it." Patricia leans forward. "How are you feeling? Not legally, not strategically, how are you?" Josephine considers the question. How is she? Her husband tried to destroy her. Her marriage was a lie. 6 years of her life were spent loving someone who viewed her as an acquisition to be managed and discarded. But she also outmaneuvered him. She also protected herself. She also proved that patience, when paired with preparation and intelligence, is more powerful than wealth or status or institutional authority. "I'm devastated," Josephine says honestly, "and I'm also relieved. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Patricia says. "You lost something that was never real. That's worth grieving. And you gained proof of your own strength. That's worth celebrating. Both things are true. Both things are true." Josephine holds on to that. The grief and the power. The loss and the victory. The end of who she thought Louis was, and the beginning of understanding who she actually is. The night stretches ahead. There will be more legal procedures, more documentation, more coordination. But for now, in this quiet room with people who came immediately when she pressed a button she hoped never to use, Josephine lets herself rest. She is safe. She is believed. She is supported by people who value her independent of what she can offer them. And somewhere across the city, Louis Ashford is beginning to understand that the quiet wife he underestimated has just dismantled his entire plan with a precision he taught her to recognize but never imagined she would deploy against him. The power has shifted. Completely. Irreversibly. And Josephine, who spent 6 years measuring love in the gaps between words, has finally learned to measure her own worth in the clarity of her own voice and the strength of her own choices. The next morning arrives with the kind of clarity that comes after a crisis. Josephine has not slept, not really. Brief periods of rest interrupted by medical checks, by Sophia bringing documents to review, by her own mind replaying the moment Louis handed her that wine glass with a smile that looked like affection but was actually malice. She is in Patricia's guest room now, a space decorated with the comfortable elegance of a woman who has learned that true luxury is safety rather than display. The bed is soft. The morning light filters through curtains that frame a view of trees rather than skyscrapers. Josephine can hear birds, a sound she has not registered in years of living in Louis' penthouse where all the windows were sealed and climate controlled and separated from anything resembling nature. Patricia knocks softly and enters with coffee. Real coffee. Made in a kitchen, not ordered from a service that delivers everything in branded packaging. She sits on the edge of the bed and waits for Josephine to speak first. "The toxicology results came back," Josephine says. She received the email an hour ago. 3 different compounds, all pharmaceutical grade, all traceable to specialty suppliers that require accounts and order histories. "Which means a paper trail," Patricia says. "Which means Louis ordered them weeks ago, maybe months. He was planning this long enough to research options, create an account under a shell name that Sophia's team has already traced back to his secondary business entity, and coordinate delivery. The premeditation makes it worse somehow. If Louis had acted impulsively, in anger or desperation, there would at least be the framework of human emotion to explain it. But this was architectural. He engineered her assault the way he engineered business deals, with research and planning and careful execution. Patricia's expression carries the particular sadness of someone who has seen this pattern before. When I left Richard, people asked me why I seemed so calm. They expected rage or breakdown. I told them I'd already done my grieving. By the time I left, I'd mourned the man I thought I married, accepted that he never existed, and directed all my energy toward protecting myself from the man who actually did exist. "How long did the grief take?" Josephine asks. I'll let you know when it's finished, Patricia says gently. But it gets quieter, and eventually it takes up less space than the relief. Josephine's phone vibrates. A message from Sophia. The prosecutor wants to meet this morning. They are ready to file formal charges. The evidence is sufficient for multiple counts, including assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potential RICO violations if the foundation financial irregularities rise to the level of racketeering. Josephine reads the message twice. RICO violations, language she associates with organized crime, not marriage. But perhaps the distinction is thinner than she previously understood. Louis organized his life around acquiring and maintaining power. He conspired with others to achieve illegal ends. He created systems designed to enrich himself while appearing to serve charitable purposes. That he did it in custom suits while attending gallery openings does not make it less criminal. It just makes it better camouflaged. Sophia needs me downtown in 2 hours, Josephine says. I'll drive you, Patricia replies, and I'm coming in with you. You don't face any of this alone. Alone. Josephine has spent the past 6 years performing a version of companionship that was actually profound isolation. Louis in the same room felt lonelier than being by herself because his presence required her constant performance, constant awareness of his expectations, constant calibration of her own personhood to fit the narrow space he allowed her to occupy. Now, sitting in Patricia's guest room with coffee going cold and legal documents to review, Josephine feels less alone than she has in years. Because the people around her are actually present, not monitoring, not judging, not requiring her to be anyone other than who she is. The prosecutor's office is less intimidating than Josephine expected. The building is official and imposing, but the conference room where they meet is ordinary. Fluorescent lights, a table with chairs that do not match, coffee in paper cups instead of china. The prosecutor is a woman named Andrea Lyons, mid-40s, with the direct gaze of someone who has heard every possible story and developed a reliable sense for which ones are true. She shakes Josephine's hand, thanks her for coming, and does not waste time with preliminaries. I've reviewed the evidence your attorney provided, Andrea says. The audio recording is exceptionally clear. The toxicology report confirms the presence of controlled substances administered without your knowledge or consent. The security footage your husband's own employee provided shows Mr. Ashford preparing your drink in isolation and then monitoring your consumption. This is one of the most well-documented cases of spousal assault I've encountered. What happens next? Josephine asks. Andrea opens a folder. We file formal charges today: assault in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, and several related counts. We'll request bail conditions that include a no-contact order and surrender of passport. Given Mr. Ashford's resources, he's a flight risk. He won't run, Josephine says. Running would mean admitting he did something wrong. Louis believes he can argue his way out of anything. Andrea's expression suggests she has encountered this particular brand of arrogance before. Then he'll have the opportunity to make that argument in court. But Mrs. Ashford, I need you to understand something. This will be public. Your husband's attorneys will try to discredit you, suggest you're motivated by money or revenge, imply that you're exaggerating a marital dispute. They'll make it uncomfortable. He drugged me and tried to engineer evidence that I was unfaithful so he could divorce me without honoring our prenuptial agreement, Josephine says. I'm already uncomfortable. At least this way, the discomfort has a purpose. Andrea nods. Then let's make sure the purpose is achieved. The meeting continues for 90 minutes. Josephine answers questions about the timeline, the marriage, the foundation's financial irregularities. She provides context for the recording, explains why she activated the emergency alert, describes Louis's behavior in the months leading up to the assault. Every answer is documented. Every detail is noted. Josephine is building a record, and she does it with the same precision she once used to build grant proposals for arts education programs. The skill set is transferable. Research, documentation, clear presentation of facts toward a specific outcome. Louis taught her that foundations are built on paperwork. He just never imagined she would build one underneath him. When the meeting concludes, Andrea walks Josephine to the elevator. You did well in there. Many survivors struggle to maintain composure when recounting the assault. Your clarity will serve you well when this goes to trial. If it goes to trial, Sophia interjects. Louis' attorneys may recommend a plea agreement once they realize how airtight the evidence is. Perhaps, Andrea says, but men like Mr. Ashford often prefer the gamble of trial to the certainty of admitting guilt. We'll be prepared either way. The elevator arrives. Josephine steps inside, and as the doors close, she sees Andrea returning to her office with the folder containing Josephine's documented truth. The machinery of justice is slow, but it is moving. That has to be enough for now. Outside, the day is bright and cold. Autumn in the city, leaves turning colors that will be beautiful for approximately 2 weeks before they fall and become something people step over without noticing. Josephine pulls her coat tighter and follows Patricia to the parking garage. Her phone rings. Unknown number. She lets it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another call from a different unknown number. Then another. Press, Sophia says, glancing at the screen. Someone leaked that charges are being filed, probably Louis' PR team trying to get ahead of the narrative. Should I answer? Josephine asks. Absolutely not, Sophia replies. We issue a prepared statement through my office. You say nothing directly until we've controlled the framing. Controlled the framing, the language of narrative warfare. Louis understands this battlefield intimately. He has spent his entire adult life managing how he is perceived, deploying resources to ensure that stories about him align with the image he wants to project. He will throw everything he has at reframing this assault as a misunderstanding, at repositioning Josephine as a vindictive wife rather than a woman he drugged and tried to destroy. But Louis is operating with incomplete information. He does not know about the foundation documents Josephine copied. He does not know that Dominic, his own security head, provided footage to prosecutors. He does not know that Trevor already gave a statement describing how Louis positioned him, suggested Josephine was interested, created a scenario that Trevor eventually recognized as coercive and wrong. Louis is building his defense on assumptions about what evidence exists. He is about to discover that his assumptions were catastrophically incomplete. Josephine's phone rings again. This time, the number is familiar. Marcus. She answers. Hey. Are you seeing the news? Marcus asks. I'm avoiding the news, Josephine replies. Good instinct, but you should know Louis' team issued a statement. They're claiming you had a mental health crisis, that Louis was trying to help you, that the emergency services intervention was unnecessary and traumatic for him. Josephine closes her eyes. Of course, Louis is deploying the oldest strategy in the manual. Frame the woman as unstable, hysterical, unreliable. Suggest that her version of events is distorted by emotional imbalance. Position himself as the concerned husband victimized by his wife's irrational accusations. Andrea anticipated this, Sophia says, loud enough for Marcus to hear. We have the medical documentation. We have the toxicology report. We have Louis' own voice on recording admitting what he did and why. His statement just created impeachable claims we can systematically dismantle. Do we respond? Josephine asks. We let the evidence respond, Sophia says. We issue a brief statement confirming that you are cooperating fully with prosecutors, that the evidence will speak for itself, and that you request privacy during this difficult time. Then we let Louis keep talking. Every claim he makes now can be used against him later. The car pulls out of the parking garage into midday traffic. Josephine watches the city move past the window, all these people navigating their own lives, unaware that 3 blocks away a woman is watching her marriage become a criminal case and her private violation become public record. There is exposure in this, vulnerability. The particulars of what Louis did to her will be discussed by strangers, analyzed by commentators, reduced to headlines and hot takes. But there is also power in it. Louis wanted this to stay private because private meant he could control the narrative. Public means evidence, documentation, witnesses who cannot be intimidated or bought because they are already on record. Josephine chose public. She chose documentation. She chose the discomfort of exposure over the danger of silence. And she would choose it again. Patricia's house comes into view. A refuge, temporary but real. Marcus is already there, his car in the driveway, because of course he came immediately. Because when Josephine's emergency network activates, they do not wait to be asked twice. Inside, Marcus has taken over the kitchen in the way he does when he is worried and needs to convert anxiety into action. There is food being prepared, coffee being brewed, the particular comfort of someone caring for physical needs when emotional needs are too large to address directly. You need to eat, Marcus says when Josephine enters. You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Josephine is not hungry, but she sits at the kitchen table and accepts the plate Marcus puts in front of her because she understands what he is actually offering. Control over something small when everything large feels chaotic. The ability to take care of her body when her sense of safety has been violated. Evidence that she is surrounded by people who notice her needs without requiring her to perform or explain. She eats. The food tastes like nothing, but she eats anyway. Sophia is on her laptop at the other end of the table, typing with the focused intensity of someone building a legal argument. She looks up briefly. Dominic's attorney just sent over his full statement. He's providing everything, the footage from the past 3 months, the emails where Louis gave him specific instructions about what to document, the financial records of his payments. He's making sure his cooperation is so complete that there's no question about his immunity. Why is he cooperating? Josephine asks. Self-preservation, Sophia says. He knows that if Louis goes down, anyone who enabled him becomes legally vulnerable. Better to cooperate early and fully than to protect Louis and risk prosecution. Self-preservation is not noble, but Josephine will accept help from whatever motivation provides it. Dominic's evidence is devastating to Louis' defense. Video documentation of premeditation, emails proving Louis knew exactly what he was doing. Financial records showing payment for services that included documenting what Louis called sensitive situations. Each piece of evidence is another stone in the foundation of the case against Louis. And Louis, who built his empire on controlling information, is discovering that information can be controlled against him with equal effectiveness. Josephine's phone buzzes with a news alert. She ignores it. Then another, and another. Marcus glances at his own phone and frowns. Louis just held a press conference. Sophia's typing stops. He what? Apparently he called reporters to his attorney's office. He's making a statement. They find the live stream on a local news website. Louis is standing in front of a backdrop of law books, flanked by 2 attorneys in suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looks serious, concerned, every inch the wronged husband speaking painful truths. I want to address the allegations that have been made against me, Louis says to the cameras. His voice is steady, measured, the tone he uses when he wants to convey both authority and vulnerability. My wife, Josephine, is someone I love deeply. She has been struggling with mental health challenges for some time. I've tried to support her privately, to protect her dignity by not making her difficulties public. But recent events have forced my hand. Josephine feels Patricia's hand on her shoulder, grounding, reminding her that what Louis is saying has no relationship to truth. Louis continues. A few nights ago, Josephine had an episode. She became disoriented, made concerning statements, and I grew worried for her safety. I was preparing to call for medical assistance when her brother and several other people arrived at our home and removed her against my wishes. I've since learned that she's making allegations about me that are completely inconsistent with what actually happened. I believe these allegations are a product of her current mental state, and I hope she gets the help she needs. The performance is masterful. Louis' expression conveys exactly the right mixture of concern, sorrow, and reluctant honesty. He is telling a story of a devoted husband forced to reveal his wife's instability to protect her from her own unfounded accusations. It would be convincing if Josephine did not have a recording of Louis admitting everything. One of the reporters asks a question. Mr. Ashford, can you comment on the criminal charges that are reportedly being filed? Louis's jaw tightens just for a second before the mask of concerned composure returns. I'm confident that when all the facts are known, when the full context is understood, these charges will be revealed as the misunderstanding they are. My attorneys are fully cooperating with the investigation, and I trust the system to arrive at the truth. Another reporter. There are reports that you drugged your wife. How do you respond to that? That allegation is false, Louis says firmly. Completely false. I would never harm my wife. I love her. This is a painful situation for everyone involved, and I'm asking for privacy as we work through it as a family. As a family. The phrasing is deliberate. Louis is trying to frame this as a private matter, a domestic situation that should be resolved internally rather than through public legal proceedings. He is attempting to reposition the narrative from criminal assault to marital difficulty, from perpetrator and victim to concerned husband and troubled wife. The press conference ends. Louis walks away from the cameras with his attorneys, and the news anchors begin their analysis, their speculation, their hot takes that treat this as a story to be consumed rather than a woman's attempt to seek justice for a genuine violation. Josephine turns off the stream. The silence in Patricia's kitchen is heavy with shared understanding. He just committed perjury about 6 times, Sophia says. Those statements were made publicly and can be used to demonstrate consciousness of guilt when they're contradicted by evidence. Will they be? Josephine asks. Contradicted? Sophia turns her laptop around, showing Josephine the statement she has been drafting. It is brief, factual, and devastating. It confirms that Josephine has provided prosecutors with extensive evidence, including audio recordings, medical documentation, and witness statements. It notes that all allegations have been substantiated by independent evidence. It expresses confidence in the legal process and requests privacy. And then, in a separate document, Sophia shows Josephine the evidence summary that will be filed with the court and therefore become public record. The toxicology report, the recording transcript, the security footage, stills, Dominic's statement, Trevor's statement, the foundation financial analysis. All of this becomes public when we file the civil suit, Sophia explains. The criminal case has stricter disclosure rules, but the civil suit is ours to control. We can release the evidence that demonstrates exactly how false Louis' press conference was. When? Josephine asks. Today, Sophia says. We file in 3 hours. By this evening, every outlet that covered Louis' press conference will have access to evidence proving he lied. Josephine thinks about this, about Louis' confident performance in front of cameras, his assurance that the truth would vindicate him, his positioning of himself as the reasonable party and her as the unstable one. He made those claims believing the evidence would remain private, that his word would carry more weight than hers, that his resources and credibility would overwhelm her allegations. He did not account for the fact that she has evidence, that she recorded him, that his own employees are cooperating with prosecutors, that the truth is not a matter of competing narratives but of documented fact. File it, Josephine says. Sophia nods and returns to her laptop. Her fingers move across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times, who understands that justice is built on paperwork and precision and the strategic deployment of information at exactly the right moment. The right moment is now. 3 hours later, the civil suit is filed. Josephine versus Louis Ashford. Assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, breach of contract under the prenuptial agreement's abuse clause, and a detailed evidence appendix that includes everything Sophia promised. The recording transcript is particularly damning. Louis's own words, time-stamped and notarized, explaining his plan with the kind of casual cruelty that is difficult to explain away. The news cycle shifts within minutes. Headlines change from billionaire's wife alleges assault to recording shows Ashford admitting to drugging wife. The press conference Louis held 6 hours ago becomes evidence of his willingness to lie publicly, his statements directly contradicted by his own recorded confession. Josephine watches the coverage from Patricia's living room. Marcus and Patricia are there, a quiet presence on either side of her. Sophia is fielding calls from reporters, issuing carefully worded statements that say everything necessary and nothing excessive. One legal analyst on television is walking through the evidence in detail. This recording is extraordinary. You have Mr. Ashford explicitly stating that he drugged his wife, that he intended to create false evidence of infidelity, and that his motive was financial. Combined with the toxicology report confirming those substances in Mrs. Ashford's system and security footage showing him preparing the drink, I don't see how his defense counters this. Another analyst agrees. And the fact that he held a press conference this morning claiming his wife was having a mental health crisis when he has to know this evidence exists suggests either incredibly poor legal advice or a belief that he could control the narrative through sheer force of personality. Neither reflects well on his judgment. The coverage is not universally sympathetic. Some commentators question why Josephine stayed with Louis if the marriage was so troubled. Some suggest she could have left quietly and avoided the public spectacle. Some frame her decision to press charges as vindictive rather than protective. But the evidence is speaking louder than the speculation. The recording is playing on loop. Louis' voice unmistakable, his words unambiguous. The toxicology report is being analyzed by medical experts who confirm that the compounds in Josephine's system could only have been administered deliberately. The security footage is being examined, frame by frame. Louis's attempt to control the narrative through his press conference has backfired spectacularly. He positioned himself as truthful and Josephine as unreliable, and then evidence emerged that proved the opposite. The contrast makes his lies more visible, his manipulation more obvious, his credibility more damaged than if he had remained silent. Josephine's phone rings. A number she recognizes. Her mother. She answers. "Mom, I'm watching the news," her mother says. Her voice is tight with emotion. "Josephine, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You never said anything was wrong." "I didn't know how to say it," Josephine replies, "and I thought I could handle it on my own." "You shouldn't have had to handle it at all," her mother says. I'm coming there. Patricia sent me the address. I'll be there in 2 hours. Mom, you don't have to. I'm coming, her mother repeats. You're my daughter. You don't go through this alone. The call ends. Josephine sits with the fact that her mother is driving 2 hours because the evidence of her daughter's assault is now public record. There is humiliation in that. But there is also relief. No more pretending. No more performing the role of woman with a perfect marriage to a powerful man. Just the truth, documented and undeniable. Marcus brings her tea. Patricia adjusts the blanket over her shoulders. Sophia finally puts down her phone and joins them in the living room. Louis's attorneys just requested an emergency meeting with Andrea, Sophia says. They want to discuss a resolution. A plea? Josephine asks. Too soon to call it that officially, but yes, I think they're recognizing that trial would be a disaster for him. The evidence is too clear. They'll want to negotiate something that avoids the worst charges in exchange for Louis accepting responsibility. What would that look like? Josephine asks. Sophia considers. Probably a guilty plea to assault, dismissal of the conspiracy charges in exchange for restitution and cooperation on the Foundation investigation, probation instead of incarceration, and a permanent restraining order, plus enforcement of the prenuptial abuse clause giving you the majority of marital assets and control of the Foundation. It is less than Louis deserves, but it is more than Josephine dared hope for when she first pressed that emergency button. Justice, in the legal system, is often about what can be proven rather than what was experienced, and what can be proven here is substantial. What do you recommend? Josephine asks. I recommend we hear their offer, Sophia says. But you don't accept anything that doesn't include Louis's public acknowledgement of what he did. No sealed records, no confidential settlement. He made this public with his press conference. The resolution needs to be equally public. Public acknowledgement. Louis admitting on the record, in a way that cannot be reframed or minimized later, that he drugged his wife and attempted to destroy her for financial gain. It is not the same as a jury convicting him after a trial, but it is Louis being forced to speak a truth he has spent his entire adult life learning to avoid. Josephine thinks about the women in Louis's social circle, the wives who look at their husbands with the particular wariness she recognizes now, the awareness that affection might be conditional and power might be weaponized. If Louis is forced to publicly admit what he did, it creates precedent. It establishes that wealthy, powerful men can be held accountable. It shows other women that documentation and preparation and strategic patience can work. That matters, not just for Josephine, but for every woman who watches this unfold and sees a reflection of her own situation. I want the public acknowledgement, Josephine says. Whatever else we negotiate, that's non-negotiable. Sophia nods. Then that's what we'll demand. The evening settles into a strange normalcy. Josephine's mother arrives with an overnight bag and fierce protective energy. Patricia makes dinner. Marcus handles the logistical details of Josephine's life that have been suspended while she dealt with immediate crisis. Someone needs to collect her belongings from the penthouse. Someone needs to change her mailing address. Someone needs to notify the organization she volunteered with that she will be unavailable for the next several weeks. The mundane details of extracting a life from the structure it has been embedded in for 6 years. It is exhausting and necessary and oddly grounding. Josephine is not just surviving violation. She is actively building the infrastructure of a life that does not include Louis. That night, lying in Patricia's guest bed, Josephine allows herself to feel the full weight of what has happened. Louis tried to destroy her. He came closer than she wants to acknowledge. If she had not been paying attention, if she had not prepared, if she had not carried that emergency button and been willing to press it, Louis's plan might have worked. She would have woken up with fragmented memories and manufactured evidence. Louis would have controlled the narrative, portrayed her as unfaithful, divorced her while retaining his resources and reputation. She would have been erased from the life they built, framed as the villain in her own story. But she was paying attention. She did prepare. And when the moment came, she activated power that Louis did not know she possessed. The grief is still there. The mourning for the marriage she thought she had, the man she believed Louis was. But alongside the grief is something else. Vindication, the validation that her instincts were right, her vigilance was justified, her patience was not weakness but strategy. Louis underestimated her completely. And that underestimation is costing him everything. Sleep comes eventually, restless but real. And when Josephine wakes the next morning, there is a message from Sophia waiting. Louis's attorneys have made an offer. They want to meet to discuss terms. The negotiation happens in a conference room that is deliberately neutral territory. Not Sophia's office, not Louis's attorney's office. A mediator's space designed to facilitate difficult conversations between parties who will never trust each other again. Louis is not there. His attorneys made clear that direct contact would violate the protective order already in place. But his presence is felt in every clause they propose, every concession they resist, every attempt to minimize what he did, while accepting consequences significant enough to make the criminal case go away. The initial offer is insulting. Louis will plead guilty to a misdemeanor, pay a fine, accept probation, and agree to counseling. In exchange, all other charges are dropped, the foundation investigation is closed, and Josephine receives the prenuptial minimum rather than the abuse clause majority. Sophia does not even dignify it with a counter. She simply slides across the table a document outlining what Josephine will accept. Guilty plea to felony assault. Public statement acknowledging he drugged Josephine and attempted to manufacture false evidence. Full enforcement of the prenuptial abuse clause. Permanent restraining order. Cooperation with the foundation investigation and repayment of all misappropriated funds. And no confidentiality agreement preventing Josephine from speaking about what happened. Louis's lead attorney, a man named Gerald who has spent 30 years protecting wealthy clients from the consequences of their actions, reads the terms and shakes his head. Mrs. Ashford is asking my client to destroy his own reputation. Your client destroyed his own reputation when he drugged his wife, Sophia replies. We're just asking him to acknowledge it publicly. The publicity component is unnecessary, Gerald argues. My client is willing to accept legal consequences, but forcing him to make a public statement serves no purpose except humiliation. It serves the purpose of truth, Josephine says. She has been quiet for most of the negotiation, letting Sophia handle the legal maneuvering, but this point is hers to make. Louis held a press conference claiming I was mentally unstable. He lied to the public to protect himself. A public acknowledgement is not humiliation, it is correction. Gerald looks at Josephine directly for the first time. Mrs. Ashford, I understand you're angry, but destroying my client's career and reputation will not undo what happened. Neither will protecting him from consequences, Josephine replies. Your client made a choice. He chose to drug me, to try to engineer my destruction, to lie about it publicly when he was caught. I am not destroying his reputation. I am allowing the truth about his actions to be known. If that destroys his reputation, perhaps his reputation was built on a foundation that deserved to collapse. The room is silent. Gerald exchanges a look with his CO counsel, a younger woman who has been taking notes but not speaking. Then he excuses himself to call Louis. The conversation happens in the hallway, muffled but audible in tone. Gerald's voice is patient, explanatory. Another voice, Louis', is sharp and resistant. The conversation escalates. Then it ends abruptly. Gerald returns to the conference room. He looks older than he did 30 minutes ago. The expression of an attorney who knows his client is making choices that cannot be protected against. My client agrees to the terms with one modification, Gerald says. The public statement will be written by our office and reviewed by yours before it is released, but he will make it. Sophia glances at Josephine. A question without words. Is this acceptable? Josephine considers. Louis's attorneys will try to soften the language, to frame his acknowledgement in ways that minimize his culpability. But the statement will still exist. It will still be public. It will still be Louis admitting, in his own name, that he did what Josephine has accused him of. Acceptable, Josephine says, as long as the statement explicitly acknowledges that he drugged me without my consent and attempted to create false evidence of infidelity for financial gain. Those specific facts must be included. Gerald nods slowly. Agreed. The rest of the negotiation proceeds with grim efficiency. Dollar amounts, timelines, enforcement mechanisms, the legal architecture of Louis' accountability, built one clause at a time. By the end of the day, there is an agreement. Louis will plead guilty to felony assault. He will issue a public statement, drafted by his attorneys and approved by Josephine's team. He will pay Josephine 60% of marital assets, approximately $240 million. He will surrender control of the foundation. He will cooperate fully with the financial investigation and repay all misappropriated funds. He will accept a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with Josephine. In exchange, the conspiracy charges will be dropped, and prosecutors will recommend probation instead of incarceration. It is done. The agreement is signed. Copies are distributed. And Josephine walks out of that conference room with legal validation of everything she experienced and documented. Louis lost, not because Josephine had more money or more power or more status. He lost because she had the truth, and she had the patience to document it, and she had the courage to activate her network when the moment required it. The public statement is released 3 days later. It is shorter than Josephine hoped, but more direct than Louis's attorneys wanted. Louis's name at the top, his acknowledgement that he administered substances to his wife without her knowledge or consent, his admission that his intent was to create false evidence for use in divorce proceedings, his expression of responsibility for the harm he caused. It does not include an apology. Louis's attorneys drew that line, but it includes the facts, and the facts are what matter. The coverage is immediate and extensive. Louis Ashford, billionaire businessman, admitting to drugging his wife. The man who held a press conference claiming his wife was mentally unstable, now forced to acknowledge he lied. The husband who positioned himself as victim revealed as perpetrator. Some commentators praise Josephine's courage. Some question why she accepted a plea instead of pushing for trial. Some reduce the entire situation to scandal and spectacle, but underneath all the commentary, there is a shift, a recognition that wealthy, powerful men can be held accountable when their victims have evidence and support and strategic patience. Josephine does not read most of the coverage. She is busy with other things, reclaiming her life, rebuilding her sense of safety, beginning the long process of healing from violation that was intimate and calculated and designed to erase her. The foundation work begins immediately. Josephine renames it the Second Chance Foundation. She appoints a new board. She redirects funding back toward the education and arts programs Louis defunded. She personally contacts every organization that should have received grants and apologizes for the delay. The apology tour is painful, explaining to program directors that the money they were promised was redirected to her ex-husband's commercial interests, that she did not know until it was too late to stop it, that she is correcting it now, but the damage of the delay cannot be undone. Most of them are gracious. Some are angry, and Josephine accepts that anger as deserved. She stole from them, even if the theft was executed by Louis's hand. She was the face of the foundation. Her signature was on the correspondence. That she was being manipulated does not erase their loss. But she is correcting it now. $4.2 million redirected back to its intended purpose. Programs restored. Scholarships funded. Art supplies purchased. Music teachers hired. The money doing what money should do, creating possibility instead of padding wealth. 6 months pass. The legal proceedings conclude. Louis's guilty plea is entered. His probation begins. The restraining order is permanent. The financial settlement is transferred. Josephine moves out of Patricia's guest room into a brownstone in her old neighborhood, a place scaled to human connection rather than social display. She still carries the emergency button. Marcus jokes that she should retire it, frame it as a museum piece, but Josephine keeps it charged and current. Not because she expects to need it again, but because it reminds her. She is never without options. She is never as powerless as someone might assume. And if a boundary is crossed, she knows how to activate help. Therapy helps. Processing the violation, the betrayal, the grief for a marriage that was never what she believed it was. Her therapist helps her see that mourning an illusion is real grief, even when the illusion was false. She is dating again, carefully. A teacher she met through foundation work. He is kind without performing kindness, interested without requiring her to be anyone other than herself. It is early and uncertain, and nothing like the grand romance Louis performed during their courtship. It is better, because it is real. No conditions, no performance, just two people learning each other with honesty instead of strategy. The story does not end with revenge. It ends with a scholarship ceremony at a school the Second Chance Foundation supports. 50 students receiving college funding for arts programs. One of them, a 17-year-old violinist, performs with technical precision and emotional depth that silences the room. Josephine watches from the audience and feels something she had forgotten. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Not because of what this moment says about her, but because this girl's talent is being nurtured instead of buried by lack of resources. After the performance, the girl finds Josephine in the reception. She is nervous, clutching her violin case. "I just wanted to thank you. My school lost its music program 4 years ago. If you hadn't brought it back, I would never have learned to play. This scholarship is changing my life." Josephine could explain that it is complicated, that the program was defunded because of her ex-husband's cruelty and restored as part of her escape from that marriage. She could tell the full story of what it cost to be standing here. Instead, she says, "You earned this with your talent and work. I'm just glad the resources were available when you needed them." The girl hugs her. Impulsive, genuine, the kind of gratitude that cannot be performed. And Josephine realizes this is what Louis could never have given her. He offered status, luxury, social position, all of it conditional on her diminishment. This moment, this connection, this purpose, is what happens when you refuse to stay small to make someone else comfortable. Josephine does not get revenge. She gets something better, a life where her value is not determined by someone else's approval, where her power is not theoretical but active, where her presence is not decorative but substantial. Louis lost more than money or status. He lost the ability to control how he is known. He will always be the man who underestimated his wife so completely that he engineered his own destruction. And Josephine will always be the woman who proved that patience, when paired with preparation, is the quietest and most devastating form of power. Now, before we close this story, I want to talk to you directly, not as a narrator, but as someone who believes you are here for a reason. Maybe you clicked because the title was dramatic. Maybe you stayed because the story felt familiar. Not the specifics, not the wealth or the drugging, but the emotional architecture underneath. The feeling of being underestimated. The experience of giving everything to someone who saw you as useful rather than valuable. The slow, aching realization that love was conditional and you had been performing for affection that should have been freely given. If any of that resonates, I need you to hear something. Josephine's story is not about revenge. It is about recognition. Our culture confuses patience with weakness. We see someone enduring hardship quietly and assume they are powerless to change it. We mistake strategic observation for inability to act. We think silence means acceptance. But Josephine shows us something different. Her patience was not passivity. It was preparation. While Louis saw a compliant wife, she was documenting. While he assumed she was trapped, she was building networks of support. While he believed her silence meant ignorance, she was gathering information. Real patience is not about suffering without agency. It is about choosing your moment. It is about understanding that some battles are won not by immediate reaction, but by careful positioning over time. Louis lost because he confused Josephine's gentleness with stupidity, her kindness with blindness. He made the mistake powerful people often make, assuming that people with less obvious power have no power at all. Here is what I want you to take into your own life. In any relationship with a power imbalance, whether romantic, professional, or familial, information asymmetry is the equalizer. The person with more money, more social status, more institutional authority starts with structural advantages. But those advantages depend on incomplete information. They depend on the less powerful person not knowing their options, not documenting patterns, not building alternative support systems. The moment you start paying attention, really paying attention the way Josephine did, the power structure changes. You do not need to match their wealth. You do not need to match their social connections. You need to see clearly, document accurately, and connect with people who value your truth. Josephine's emergency button is a metaphor for all of us. It represents the moment when observation becomes action, when patience converts to power, when you stop waiting for someone to treat you better and start protecting yourself from how they're choosing to treat you. Ask yourself, what patterns have you been explaining away that you should be documenting? What support systems could you build that do not depend on the person who holds power over you? What information do you have access to that might shift the dynamic if used strategically? You do not have to stay in situations where love is conditional, where affection is a reward for compliance, where your value is determined by how well you serve someone else's image. But leaving or changing the dynamic requires seeing clearly first. The other lesson in Josephine's story is the difference between character and status. Louis had status, wealth, social position, professional respect, institutional power. All of it was real. All of it was substantial. But none of it was character. Character is how you treat people who cannot benefit you. It is what you do when no one is watching. It is whether your love has conditions or flows freely. It is if you use your power to elevate others or to control them. Status can be built through strategy, inheritance, ruthlessness. Character can only be built through consistent choices aligned with values deeper than self-interest. Josephine had less status but infinitely more character. And in the end, character attracted the support that status could not buy. Marcus's protection, Sophia's legal expertise, Patricia's social courage, even Dominic's eventual cooperation. People helped Josephine not because she could offer them anything, but because her treatment of others, even when she was powerless, earned their respect. When you are facing someone with more status than character, do not try to compete on their terms. Build something they cannot access, genuine relationships, moral clarity, truth that does not require maintenance because it is not a performance. If you are in a situation where someone is treating you as less than you are, I am praying for several things for you right now. First, I pray for clarity, not the dramatic revelation, but the quiet, steady ability to see what is actually happening without the distortion of hope, fear, or obligation. May you see patterns clearly. May you trust what you observe. Second, I pray for wisdom about timing. Not every battle needs to be fought today. Some situations require strategic patience. May you know the difference between waiting with purpose and waiting out of fear. Third, I pray for connections. May you find your Marcus, your Sophia, your Patricia. People who see your value independent of what you can offer them, who will show up when you need support, who will believe you even when the person harming you has more social credibility. Fourth, I pray for courage at the crucial moment. Josephine carried that button for months before she needed it. When the moment came, she had seconds to decide whether to use it. I pray that when your moment comes, whatever form it takes, you will have the courage to activate the power you have been building. And finally, I pray for your healing after the exposure, because even when justice happens, even when truth is revealed and authority reverses, there is still grief. Grief for who you hoped that person was. Grief for the time you invested. Grief for the version of yourself that believed love could be earned through perfect performance. May you move through that grief into something better. A life where your value is not negotiated, where affection is not conditional, where you are chosen not for what you provide but for who you are. You are seen, you are valued, and your patience, if it is strategic rather than fearful, will become your power. Thank you for walking through Josephine's story with me. If it resonated with you, if it gave you clarity, hope, or courage, I would be honored if you would subscribe to Billionaire's Romance Stories by Dennis. Every story I share explores the human truth underneath the wealth and drama, how power actually works, how dignity survives crisis, how quiet people sometimes hold the most devastating strength. Subscribe so you never miss a story. And if this one helped you see something in your own life more clearly, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. You are not alone. You are not powerless. And your story is not over. I will see you in the next one.